Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. I'm Douglas MacKenzie, bringing you stories from Scotland and around the world. On today, Thursday, the 1st of August. I'm joined to discuss the stories behind the headlines by Siobhan Tolland, SNP Councillor for the Lochee Ward on Dundee City Council. Welcome, Siobhan.
Hiya.
We start, as ever, with an update from Ukraine. On this day, 890 since the full-scale Russian invasion of the country. Ukraine has received its first F-16 fighter jets, a US official has confirmed to the Associated Press. The arrival of the jets was first reported by Bloomberg. Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands and Norway, all NATO members, have committed to providing Ukraine with more than 60 of the planes. The Russian jet fighter fleet is still estimated to be about 10 times larger, but it's been kept at bay to some extent by Ukraine's anti-aircraft defences. Ukraine needs at least 130 F-16s to neutralise Russian air power. Volodymyr Zelensky has said Russian forces have made gains in eastern Ukraine because Kyiv's allies are restricting its use of Western-supplied weapons and its forces are still awaiting arms deliveries from abroad. Russia consolidated gains in eastern Ukraine in July, taking control of almost 200 square kilometres, according to analysis by Agence France-Presse, using data from the US-based Institute for the Study of War. The coming presidential election in the US posed a challenge for Kyiv, Zelensky said in an interview with French media, including Agence France-Presse. Ukraine does not want China to act as a mediator, but rather to apply pressure and force Russia to end the war, according to Zelensky. Zelensky said Ukraine and the entire world wanted to see Russia take part in the next peace summit. Since the Swiss summit held in June without Russian participation, Zelensky has indicated that Moscow should be represented at a second summit, tentatively planned for this year. China has said it will prohibit the export of all unregulated civilian drones that can be used for military or terrorist purposes, and that certain drone features will be restricted. China has been criticised for allowing its drones to be supplied to Russia and also allegedly collaborating with it on drone design. Ukrainian sanctions prohibiting the transit of oil from Russian producer Lukoil do not pose a threat to Slovakia's energy security, according to Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. Kyiv has the EU's full understanding on the matter, Shmyhal said. Slovakia's pro-Russian Prime Minister Robert Fico has said his country will halt diesel supplies to Ukraine unless it restores oil flows from Lukoil through the pipeline on its territory. Slovakia and Hungary together supply about 10% of Ukraine's diesel. Ukraine has invoked a law allowing it to skip international debt payments as it finalises a restructuring plan agreed with bondholders to slash $20 billion from its international borrowings. Siobhan, rather than talk about military toing and froing in Ukraine, I think it's a great opportunity with you being a councillor. If you can tell us a little bit about your experience with Ukrainian refugees in Dundee, and of course their experience in Dundee.
I mean, it's last year I was invited to the anniversary of the war. They were holding a vigil to commemorate that anniversary, and of course on the same day we had a rally and demonstration in support of Gaza as well. So there was a kind of a connection there, ideologically as well as physically, and there was people from the Ukraine rally marching in the Gaza rally and vice versa as well. The one of the people from the Palestinian march had actually helped the kind of the sound system that the Ukrainian organisation were struggling with. So there was something actually really quite special there in terms of kind of people across the globe coming together in terms of their suffering, but also their hope. And that's one of the things that struck me in that rally was the hope of the Ukrainian population that they were here, in amongst the sadness and the loss that they were experiencing. There was a lot of talk about the kids, loads of kids that have just gone missing in Ukraine as a result of this invasion. So there's kind of a lot of sadness mingled with kind of with gratitude, but a gratitude I felt that really wasn't warranted, because we are better for the Ukrainian population being here. They have a wonderful, rich history and culture and art, and that is present across everything that they do. So there's something that we gain from having Ukrainian refugees here. And I think it's that connection that we certainly keep trying to reinforce. And it's certainly what I try to reinforce as well, is that there shouldn't be a gratitude that they've come here, but rather we should be welcoming and grateful that they have allowed us an opportunity to see and experience and share their culture with them. And they have a rich history. We were invited to a great event from a friend of mine, Bodan, who's from Ukraine, who's a student at the university, and they did an evening of culture and art and music, and it's all embedded with the kind of the sad history that they've had, but the overriding principle is the need and desire for freedom that kind of crosses and spans across many centuries, actually. So there's a kind of a strong connection, I think, in Dundee, and I would like to think that Dundee has given them the welcome that they deserve and that they hoped for.
Thank you, Siobhan. It's nice to hear that Dundee maintains its reputation as a friendly and welcoming city. You mentioned Gaza in your answer there, and it's to Israel and Gaza that we turn next. More than 39,480 Palestinians have been killed, and 91,128 have been injured in Gaza since 7th of October, the Gaza Health Ministry said in a statement today. The Israeli military announced today that the head of Hamas military wing, Mohammed Daif, was killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza last month. The announcement came a day after the group's political leader was assassinated in Tehran. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Joe Biden will hold a phone call today and discuss escalating tensions in the Middle East. Top Iranian officials will meet the representatives of Iran's regional allies from Lebanon, Iraq and Yemen today to discuss potential retaliation against Israel after the killing of the Hamas leader in Tehran, according to Reuters. The region faces a risk of widened conflict between Israel, Iran and its proxies after Ismail Haniyeh's assassination in Tehran on Wednesday and the killing of Hezbollah's senior commander on Tuesday in an Israeli strike on the outskirts of the Lebanese capital Beirut. Israel has said it is prepared for any eventuality following warnings from Iran and its allies of retaliation for the killing of senior leaders from Hezbollah and Hamas, and will respond strongly to any attack. China hopes Palestinian factions can create an independent state as soon as possible, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said on Thursday, while responding to a question on the killing of the Hamas chief in Iran. China earnestly looks forward to all Palestinian factions, on the basis of internal reconciliation, creating an independent Palestinian state as soon as possible, Lin Jian said during a regular press briefing. Indonesia's President Joko Widodo has condemned the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, calling it intolerable. Turkey has blocked cooperation between NATO and Israel since October because of the war in Gaza, and said the alliance should not engage with Israel as a partner until there is an end to the conflict. Lufthansa Group has cancelled all its passenger and cargo flights to and from Tel Aviv with immediate effect until 8th of August, a spokesman for the German airline said today. The Palestinian Quds News Network has posted footage of the funeral of Al Jazeera journalist Ismail Al-Ghul, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike, along with his cameraman Rami Al-Rifi, west of Gaza City on Wednesday. A child was also killed in the attack. The two reporters were wearing media vests, and there were identifying signs on their vehicles when they were targeted, Al Jazeera said. The rector of St Andrews University has been dismissed from the institution's governing body and her position as a trustee after she accused Israel of genocide and apartheid. Stella Maris criticised the decision to remove her from the two roles, which came after the university commissioned an investigation into an email she sent in November to all St Andrews students, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. No good news there, Siobhan. I'm curious, this assassination which took place in Tehran. This was the political leader of Hamas, a former Palestinian prime minister, who has not been in Gaza since 2017 and has been the main spokesman in the ceasefire and peace talks which have been held in Qatar under the auspices of the Americans, Egyptians, and Qatar itself. One can perhaps understand Israel going after military personnel as targets, but it seems very strange to target the main negotiator in peace talks.
I don't see that as strange. I think that's in line with the extreme right-wing Netanyahu government, where many members of their cabinet are part of the white settler movement who intend fully to settle in Gaza against the Palestinians' will. I think that the assassination has been twofold attempted. I think it's an attempt to destroy the peace talks. I'm not convinced that Netanyahu wants peace. He's held to hostage almost. Let's give him a little bit of justice and say that he's held to hostage by the extreme right or the more extreme right within his cabinet who have threatened to break that alliance if he negotiates peace. Peace is not something that many people in that cabinet want. So there's a political machinations that's going on inside Israel here. It's a extreme right-wing government, and the cabinet and Netanyahu are kind of subject to that and enacting that out. I think the other element, of course, is that the attempt to spread the discord. They have been goading I think Iran for quite a while now. This is, I think, the word sanctity. I think Tehran have been using. It's not just the assassination of someone who negotiates peace. It's an assassination on foreign territory, protected territory as well. So this has huge implications for peace. Not to bring peace, but actually to kind of dissipate and abandon peace, it seems to me. I think this is unfortunately in accord with Netanyahu's extreme right-wing government. It doesn't benefit Netanyahu. Peace doesn't benefit him because he'll be left without power. So there's a kind of a real political agenda within the cabinet and within that government there in Israel. And I'm very clear that it is the government because I don't want to bring the Israeli people or the Israeli population into this argument because I'm not necessarily convinced they're part of that. It's a governmental thing in the same way that we weren't responsible for the Conservative government either.
Yeah, thank you. A very clear answer. And as you say, the potential of spreading. I mean, given that Haniyeh was in Qatar, it surely would have been an easy job to assassinate him there with a Mossad agent. But to strike in Iran does seem like it's trying to widen the conflict, where he's there as a guest, and they now feel honour bound to retaliate. Moving on to stories at home. Following reports of a pro-UK far-right rally being planned to take place in Glasgow, City Council leader Susan Aitken has tweeted her anger at the event proposed for September. Ms Aitken tweeted, "Glasgow City Council has received no notification of any rally, but then we know Tommy Robinson and his ilk don't really care about respecting laws or public places. He's not welcome in Glasgow, and neither is anyone who chooses to align with this poisonous rhetoric." The announcement of a fascist gathering in Glasgow follows violent protests by violent right-wing thugs across England in the wake of the Southport stabbing in which a 17-year-old youth killed 3 young girls and injured others. The Scottish Greens have said that the politics of hate can never be welcome in Scotland. Scottish Green co-leader and Glasgow MSP Patrick Harvie has written to Glasgow MSPs from all parties calling for a united response against the rally and the politics of hate. Mr. Harvie said, "Glasgow is a proudly multicultural city with a long history of standing up against the far right. There's no place for the fear, hate and division of these gangs here, nor for the violence and criminality they bring." Well, Siobhan, being a council representative, I'm sure you can appreciate the statement that Susan Aitken has made, and will probably echo her words.
Of course. I think that one of the, I mean, this was before I was a councillor, but one of the things that we did in I think it was 2019, just before the lockdown, is Nigel Farage had intended to come to the Caird Hall in Dundee to give a speech, and we immediately spurred into action, but we didn't want a rally, we didn't want a march, we didn't want groups of angry men shouting at each other, to be perfectly honest. So what we did is we created a celebration of diversity, and our intention was to fill the city square, which is where Caird Hall is, with multicultural events. We had Indian dancers, we had drummers, we had a kind of a reggae band. You know, we had a whole host of celebrations of cultural events to celebrate multiculturalism and to celebrate diversity in the city. I'm kind of very proud to say that he actually didn't come, that he cancelled the event. So it's one of the things that we say, that we always kind of beat my Nigel Farage off. But this is a kind of, and that's the core point, isn't it? We have to beat fascism. We have to beat white supremacy by a celebration of diversity. We don't do that by getting angry back. But we do it by promoting a positive image of our society and reassuring people that they will always be welcome, that their cultures and their arts and their influence and their experience in our society will always be of benefit to a society in and of itself. So there's a kind of lot of stuff that we can do here in a very positive way. I become slightly concerned when one march marches against another march, because it just feels a little bit like a standoff. I think maybe we need to be a bit more imaginative in how we respond to these kind of fascist marches. The people like Tommy Robinson, or whatever his name is, because it's not actually his name, they're not welcome. I think the people of Scotland and the people of Glasgow will make that very clear. We just need to look at what happened in Liverpool after that terrible event. A vigil was hijacked by fascists, hijacked by the English Defence League, but the people in the community tidied that up. They brought order there, and they brought humanity back into that after that terrible event. And that's perhaps what we need to rely on now, is the humanity of us and that celebration of multiculturalism. And hopefully we will do something amazing in Glasgow that will tell Tommy Robinson and his ilk that fascism is not welcome here.
Thank you. A very hopeful answer. Staying in Glasgow, speaking in the city today, Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar has said that he supports the pensioners' winter fuel payment being means tested. He said that the UK government cuts represent an opportunity for the Scottish government to make the new pension age winter heating payment, PAWHP, targeted, adding that he thought it made little sense for millionaires to be receiving the handout. The Scottish Government supports making the payment universal to avoid poor pensioners who are just outside the means test or do not receive a qualifying benefit from losing out, particularly as they are likely to face a colder climate and higher heating bills in Scotland. Age UK has launched an emergency petition to help save the winter fuel payment, WFP, for struggling pensioners, and after little more than 48 hours, approaching 100,000 people have already signed it, showing the depth of feeling among our older population and their friends and supporters. The petition calls on the UK government to halt their proposed change to the WFP and think again. The charity says that means testing the WFP this winter with virtually no notice and no compensatory measures to protect the poor and vulnerable pensioners who will miss out is the wrong policy decision and will lead to hardship and distress. Commenting, SNP MSP Kevin Stewart said, Anas Sarwar previously promised that a Labour government would ensure no pensioner had to choose between heating and eating. We now know this promise is as empty as his principles, with his backing of the new Labour Chancellor's decision to slash the winter fuel payment. Mr Stewart added, the promise of so-called change during the election campaign now lies in tatters as the Labour Party show their true colours and their Scottish branch office is now behind them on an austerity agenda. Mr Stewart finished by saying, the SNP will do everything in our power to stand up for pensioners across Scotland, and I call on Starmer and Sarwar to reverse this decision before we see the devastating impact of this abysmal policy this winter. Well, I'm sure people would have sympathy with the thought that there shouldn't be subsidies for millionaires, but the cut-off point for the payment is below £12,000, which is hardly millionaire status. What's your take on it, Siobhan?
The Labour Party have been bringing in this notion against universality, actually for quite a while now. That's beginning to seep into the narrative for the last 3-4 years, I've noticed, and that bringing in of the means-tested benefit structure. I think there's a couple of issues that we need to do. I think that we need to kind of say, I mean, what's Anna Sarwar said in the debate, read my lips, no austerity. Well, you know, here's the kind of, there's the first level of evidence against that. It's a very strange and hard decision to make. There would have been a million other decisions that Rachel Reeves could have taken in order to save that I think it's at 1.8 billion that they said that they might be saving from this, but they chose this one in the same way that they chose not to scrap the 2-child cap as well. So these are very clear decisions that set that political agenda now for Labour. They say it's been tough decisions, but they made those decisions anyway. There was a million other decisions they could have made, but they didn't, and they decided to really expose the vulnerable. And that is a test, I think, of how Labour might go. And it's a sad indictment, because I kind of, obviously, I kind of SNP councillor, but I was hopeful that the Labour Party would at least employ some common sense, humane understanding of society, and that they would step up to the plate and say, this is what we need. We need investment in our public services. We need to borrow to invest in our public services that they seem to be refusing to do. The problem with the pensioner one is, and you're right about the millionaires, but the concept of universality is there for a reason. It is to embed equality into the system and not to separate the rich from the poor. Universality is universality. Everyone has a right to it. Now, the thing with pensioners, however, is that the uptake for things like universal credit is very, very low. Our ex-MP, Anne McLaughlin, did a lot of work into that, trying to get old age pensioners and pensioners to uptake universal credit. But universal credit seems to be the marker of trying to get now access to the winter fuel payments. So this will, I think it was Age UK said that 800,000 older people are on very low incomes that probably would entitle them to universal credit, but they don't claim. So you have this like nearly 800,000, nearly a million pensioners that will lose out on that money. There's also high level of disability, high level of illness and stuff, so costs will be much higher. So the income element of it becomes very, very tricky in that respect. And once we begin to dig into it, it's like you say, well, let's move the millionaires out of the way. But it's like you say, it's £12,000 a year. That's £1,000 a month. Could you live off that? I couldn't. I mean, it's low. It's extraordinarily low. And in Scotland especially, we have higher heating costs and colder. It's much colder up here as well. So, in Scotland, I think it'll be particularly severe. But I think that what we have, and this is the battle, because we're on new political terrain now, because, we have the Labour Party as a government, and thank God we don't have the Tories, but, we have the Labour Party now to contend with. And Anna Sarwar's kind of, I think, disgraceful comment that the money, of course, that the Scottish Government would get, or would ordinarily have got in order to implement our own version of it. It's just that, well, perhaps it will allow you to kind of like focus in. So what they're trying to do, of course, is shift the SNP position more to the right and actually start removing that concept of universalism and universality of benefits that we think is core to the idea of the party and the ideals of the people of Scotland as well. So there is an enforcement from Labour here and trying to shift our position more to the right through economic necessity, because we all know that our powers in the Scottish Parliament are limited. We cannot borrow in order to invest in that. We cannot do that. There is no more money to take from the pot. So we're dependent on Westminster. The Labour Party must step up here. This is absolutely huge. At the election count in Dundee Central, I spoke to one of the Labour councillors, and I like him. I think I like him a lot, actually. He's very good. And I asked this, like, is Labour up to are they able to do this? And he said, what do you mean? And it's we've got masses of economic problems, and also the article just there, we have the influx of fascism now. It's here. It's on our doorsteps. Far too many kind of far too many votes for reform in Scotland for my liking as well. But and this is where the problem, I think, and I'm going to go back to the fascist rallies. We can celebrate multiculturalism, we can do all that, and we can do positive things, and that's an ad hoc response to fascist rallies. But if we're going to defeat fascism and we're going to defeat the extreme right wing, then we must offer people hope. We must offer them basic necessities of life. If you look at the English election results, something like 41% were extreme right wing votes, the Conservatives and Reform. If the Labour Party do not resolve these issues and offer people decent housing, good benefits, money to heat their homes and feed themselves, then the danger will be that people will shift to the right because they offer very simple solutions to complex problems. This is how fascism kind of comes in. They kind of enter in and offer these solutions when people are desperate. And the Labour Party have to deal with that by actually offering people hope and offering people a sustained, good standard of living. And if they won't do that by cutting benefits, so we have long-term thinking here, and if the Labour Party turn more to the right and don't turn more left as they said they would, or as they have in their history, which is the post-45 settlement, all that kind of stuff, that the amazing stuff that they did, if they don't turn towards that again, we do run the danger of allowing fascism to breed even more. So there's a lot at stake here in terms of how Labour is going to move forward. It's up to Scotland and it's up to the people. It's up to the SNP as the leading party, or maybe the leading party depending on the general election result, but the party in the Scottish Parliament, to sustain a good, humane, well-being based economy in order to make sure our people are protected. So there's big battles ahead. And I tried not to judge Labour. I tried to sit back and try and be reflective and not get into that, narrative of Labour did this, but it's looking it's looking like their instinct, like the right wing and the Conservative Party, is to punish our poor and vulnerable. And we can't allow that. We can't accept that as a society.
Thank you. Staying, you mentioned demands for the Scottish Government to step in. Next story is there have been calls from council leaders for the Scottish Government to step into the negotiations between COSLA and trade unions after it was announced that refuse collection workers would go on strike during the Edinburgh Festival. Cammy Day, the leader of Edinburgh City Council, has called on the First Minister to intervene in the negotiations. Unite, Unison and the GMB have rejected a pay offer of 3.2% and are calling on the Scottish Government to find additional money to settle the dispute. Yesterday, talks took place between the Scottish Finance Secretary, Shona Robeson, COSLA leaders and the unions to understand what an improved negotiating envelope may look like. Well, Siobhan, you're kind of on both sides of this argument, being a member of the government party in Scotland and on Dundee Council. So how do you see this?
I think the refuse collectors deserve a better pay rise, and I don't think that anybody would disagree with that. It's a relatively difficult job. It's a low-paid job, and it's one of those jobs that kept us safe during the pandemic, and we keep missing that point. We celebrated these people during the pandemic, and then suddenly it's that kind of, well, sorry, we can't pay you now. I don't think that's I'm not laying blame on the Scottish Government. I'm not laying blame on the councils per se, because I think that we are in a position where money is extraordinarily tight. I see the budgets in my council and it is horrendous. It's been cut after cut after cut. And I will go back to this. It has been 14 years of austerity where everything is absolutely cut to the bone. And then we would get into a situation where we've no more money to give. No more money to give. So I hope that the Scottish Government finds some kind of resolution. I think they've managed very well up until now to avoid strike action, and because I think that it comes from a position of sympathy and a position of we're trying, but here's where our kind of lines have to be here because we can't do any more. There's no more money. Now, this comes back to Westminster, and this is where the pressure needs to go onto the new Labour government now as well, because this is why we need more money. The councils need more money. We need more investments. We need investments in our services. We need a kind of injection of funding to offset that 14 years of cut that has cut everyone to the absolute bone. It is horrendous on the ground in terms of poverty. So it's not that I'm torn. I think Shona Robeson is a very kind of able finance minister. I think she's a very compassionate person as well. So I hope that those negotiations have gone well. But I have great sympathy for the refuse collectors because I don't think 3.2% is brilliant given what we have been through over the last 3-4 years. They do deserve better. It's becomes extraordinarily difficult. This is, I think this has been thinking about this for the last, since Labour really came in, and it kind of pushes the SNP into a position, I think, that where we've been in power for a long time in the Scottish Parliament, and the SNP in Dundee have been in power for quite a while as well, but we become that party that seem to manage cuts and officiate on cuts. Cuts not necessarily of our making, because these are imposed upon us. If we have our budgets cut, then we have to manage how we do that. We can't just refuse to make those cuts, but we've become in the long term the party that looks as if it is making those cuts, even though they're imposed upon us. So it becomes a problematic political positioning for us as well. But if we had the power and we had the authority, I don't think we'd be having these negotiations. We would be accepting a kind of higher rise, I think.
Yeah. Okay, moving from public finance to private finance, the Bank of England has cut interest rates for the first time since the start of the COVID pandemic, moving to ease the pressure on households after ratcheting up borrowing costs to combat the worst inflation shock in 4 decades. In a finely balanced decision after holding borrowing costs at the highest level since the 2008 financial crisis for a year, the bank's Monetary Policy Committee, MPC, voted by a narrow majority to cut its base rate by a quarter of a percentage point to 5%. Exposing divisions within the central bank's most senior ranks over the timing of a cut, the MPC was split by 5 votes to 4, with the Governor, Andrew Bailey, casting the deciding vote for the first reduction in borrowing costs since March 2020. With headline inflation holding at the bank's 2% target for a second consecutive month in June, financial markets had expected a cut in rates, although City economists had predicted it would be a close call amid fears over stubbornly high inflation becoming entrenched. The pound fell against the dollar and euro after interest rates were cut to 5%. Well, Siobhan, maybe slightly ironic with a new government coming to power that the good news on economics comes not from them but from the independent Bank of England. Not a huge change, but it will help some people with mortgages, and possibly, although they're not obliged to do it, interest rates on credit cards may go down.
Mm-hmm. It's been a international finance is not necessarily my area of expertise, but I think it's something that people are taking a bit more interest in because it's that kind of, so many of us have mortgages now, that it does, have an impact if you're not on a fixed rate, or if your fixed rate's up for renewal. Mine's is up for renewal at the moment. So there's that kind of, how's it going to be? How much more expensive is it going to be? I mean, last year was incredibly high, so it does make a huge difference sometimes to literally the money that people have got in their pockets. So it feels like a bit of a kind of distant decision, but it does actually have that ripple effect. And it's funny because I was saying to my friend the other day that, trying to sort out my mortgage, which is due. She went, but the interest rates are supposed to be coming down. Maybe you'd better wait. And then it's just that kind of, that kind of reality, because we're all sitting hoping for a little bit of good news, and it's just a small bit of good news, but it feels maybe that things are beginning to settle a little bit better than we had post-Truss, shall we say. I noticed the Conservatives are trying to take credit for it, and I'm just going to say that, it's a bit like kind of, causing a fire and then coming out with a hose and saying, look, I managed to put it out because this was the Conservative government that caused this problem. Yeah.
Yes, okay, thanks. So, there'll be many people in your position, including me, with mortgages up for renewal, so it may bring some comfort. Shell's profits have climbed to $14 billion, that is £10.9 billion, for the first half of 2024, after its decision to focus on fossil fuels over low-carbon energy delivered stronger than expected earnings for a second consecutive quarter. Europe's biggest oil and gas company rewarded its shareholders with a further $3.5 billion in share buybacks after reporting adjusted earnings to $6.3 billion in the 3 months to the end of June. The latest results, which have taken the company's total profits for the first half of the year to $14 billion and its share buybacks to $7 billion, have angered climate campaigners as Shell continues to grow its global gas business and pull back on investment in low-carbon energy. Shell delivered its results days after BP topped forecasts by reporting profits of almost $2.8 billion for the second quarter, and set out plans to develop an oil hub in the Gulf of Mexico. Together, the companies have reported combined profits over the last year amounting to $31.2 billion. Shell watered down a climate pledge this year by reframing a target to reduce the carbon emissions intensity of the energy it sells by 15 to 20% by the end of the decade, compared with its previous target of 20%. BP is raising its dividend payments by 10% while buying back stock worth $1.7 billion over the next 3 months to bring its total buybacks for the first half of the year to $3.5 billion and $7 billion for 2024 as a whole. Well, you said international finance was not your subject, Siobhan, but I'm sure there'll be many people saying, well, if you're looking for money to fund things like winter fuel payment, would this not be a good place to start the profits made by oil
Mhm.
companies?
Well, that's one of the choices we could make, isn't it? One of the motions I put at conference a couple of years ago was for an independent Scotland to have to nationalise, not just like a kind of GB energy type investment, but to nationalise our resources and make sure that we have a stake in these industries. But the problem we have here is that we have this kind of how does a society, a global world, how is it okay for these like oil giants to make absolutely staggering, eye-wateringly staggering profits when people in our country, in our cities, in our towns are freezing and struggling because they're not going to get £300 winter fuel payment, struggling to heat themselves. It is outrageous, and it's capitalism really just gone absolute mad. And we have to start thinking about really genuinely new systems in order to bring that under control. We're unusual in the sense that we don't really tax the oil companies as much as other nations do. If you look at the Nordic countries, they've got a stake in these kind of companies, but they also kind of tax much more, and the oil companies accept the terms of that as well. So it would allow us much more money, much more freedom, and much more flexibility, as you said, in order to fund these things that we desperately need. So you've got this situation, and you've kind of said that, haven't you? You've got this situation where we're kind of withdrawing £300 from vulnerable pensioners who are freezing and can't afford to heat their homes, but somehow it's okay, and we celebrate almost that Shell have made £10.9 billion in the first half of this year. There is something not right here. There's also another worrying step here as well, is that it's because of their investment in oil. And that's what's concerning too, because they've shifted away from renewals, Shell, and moved back into the oil production as well. And that's absolutely dangerous for us and the planet. It said, I was reading earlier on that like they'd halted construction. I think this is why the profits have gone. It was one of Europe's largest biofuel plants that was an attempt to try and bring low carbon flights for airlines. So there was kind of something there that they're trying to do, but obviously realised it wasn't as profitable as it could be, and then withdrew from that. So the problem with this is the bottom line is always profit. It's always going to be profit if you've got these massive companies that are answerable to shareholders. Profit is the drive, and it's the first, the middle, and the end gain for these kind of companies. That's why they're moving back into fossil fuels, because it's more profitable. But there are other things at stake now. So that notion of profit at all costs needs to become an antiquated concept, and it needs to be rethought. And on a global level as well as a national level as well, it is outrageous. It's outrageous. I cannot believe sometimes why we're not literally out on the streets up in arms about this type of thing, because it just feels so horrifically unjust.
Thank you. The world's ill divided. The EU has
Indeed.
warned the EU has warned the UK that it must fully apply the existing Brexit deals on EU citizens and Northern Ireland before it will entertain a reset in the relationship with London. A leaked document reported by the Financial Times lists 8 demands of the UK government in order to demonstrate the real UK government commitment to a good faith reset of the relationship with the EU. EU leaders have said they are open-minded about the future relationship with the UK, and Germany has said it is enthusiastic about a youth mobility deal. They have also raised the possibility of a new EU-UK agreement that could encompass deals on mutual recognition of professional qualifications and other low-hanging fruit. The European Commission's concerns were reported to have been raised by the EU Vice President Maroš Šefčovič at his first meeting with the new EU Relations Minister Nick Thomas-Simons in Brussels 2 weeks ago. Brussels has specifically told the UK it must change the Home Office's approach to EU citizens who had been in the UK for fewer than 5 years before Brexit. The UK government was successfully challenged on the Home Office's insistence that those with pre-settled status had to reapply for full settled status once they had been in the country for 5 years. The High Court ruled that the government's position was unlawful, and although the UK government has subsequently made changes to its own rules on pre-settled status, there are still question marks over the Home Office's interpretation of the withdrawal agreement deal on EU citizens. Brussels has now decided to press ahead with the threat of legal action it first made against the UK government in May 2020. Last week, the European Commission gave the UK 2 months to respond to its concerns over the treatment of EU citizens, putting the UK on formal notice that several points remain unaddressed. In particular, elements concerning EU citizens or their family members, for example, children in legal guardianship or extended family members exercising free movement rights who should be beneficiaries of the withdrawal agreement. Brussels has also raised questions about the full implementation of the Northern Ireland trading arrangements agreed under the so-called Windsor Framework. Area where, of course, there is huge divergence of views between the Scottish government and the UK government. Is this just a case of the Labour government reiterating the Conservative attempt to negotiate, of saying this is what we want and you'll just follow?
I mean, I'm going to try and be nicer about the Labour because they're still very early into power. I'm not necessarily convinced. Perhaps maybe they're working in with the same level of arrogance and the same level of kind of British exceptionalism, shall we say? But there is a definite naivety, I think, about Labour and its attempt to restore the relationship with the EU. It does seem to be a little bit on our terms because we want it, not necessarily, a relationship is a two-way process, isn't it? Where there's give and take and there's, a mutual understanding and often a mutual respect as well. And there is an element here. And I think this is kind of the point that the EU is trying to make, isn't it? It's like, respect our citizens, let's make that the beginning of negotiations. Allow respect and dignity to our European citizens, and then we can start to talk. And that's pretty much what they've been saying. And it's not a bad ground to start on. And Labour need to really, I think quite carefully here and quite deeply in terms of what kind of relationship is it that we want from Europe? Well, we know what Scotland wants. Scotland wants to be part of the European Union again. I think that, that's, as far as I can see, the settled will the Scottish people, and that's been shown time and time again, I think. But there is a new era now, and Labour are showing some signs that they want to reset a relationship with the European Union, but I don't see any evidence on how they will do that and what they will give in order to do that. Now, this will be a good test, isn't it? I mean, let's see what Labour does here, and let's see if they allow this and if they appreciate that this is an important part, because it's a humane part, it's dignity to our citizens, then maybe there could be the beginning of a kind of a new relationship. But they have to do this. They have to do it because it's the right thing to do, let alone because they need it for a kind of future relationship. But let's see what Labour do, and I'm trying to be hopeful, and hopefully they will. At least have some sense of kind of justice for the European citizens that are in pre-settled status here.
Yeah, it's a story which will run and run. The largest exchange of Russian political prisoners with the West since the Cold War has happened today, with the release of US reporter Evan Gershkovich and former US Marine Paul Whelan being confirmed this afternoon. The exchange began with the Russian spies Anna Dulceva and Artem Dulcev serving a sentence for spying and falsifying documents in Slovenia being handed over to the Russians in Kaliningrad. Gershkovich was arrested in March 2023 while reporting in the city of Ekaterinburg and was last month sentenced to 16 years in prison for espionage. He pleaded not guilty, and the Wall Street Journal and the US government have dismissed the charges as nonsense. A possible exchange has been mooted for months, with long discussions behind closed doors involving numerous governments and few details seeping into the public domain. Of course, since then there have been further releases with Kara-Murza, the Russian opposition leader, being freed, and I'm sure commentators didn't want to be curmudgeonly about this. No one wanted to see Kara-Murza die in a gulag the way that Navalny did, and of course, no one wants to see journalists locked up for doing their jobs. But some commentators were saying, well, this is a great signal for Putin. Whenever he needs some of his spies back, just round up some Western journalists, and then he's got a negotiating tool. And Ukrainians have said, well, you know, we've had, as you mentioned in your answer to the first question, all these children taken from Ukraine forcibly to Russia and being re-educated, and our POWs, which the International Committee of the Red Cross have not managed to visit. Why does no one care about them as hostages, but only these Western and Russian opposition figures? How do you see the exchange?
I'm struggling to. It sounds a terrible thing to say, but I'm struggling to figure out what Putin gets from this. Does that make sense? And I think that it's because it's a very public, and it's like you say, it's the journalists, it's these people that, you know, people know across the world almost. You know, these are well known figures, and so there's something very symbolic about that gesture as well, and because it looks on the surface too. I mean, it looks like the negotiations were happening for many months from what I could gather. So I'm not quite understanding. Is this? I think maybe I was thinking a bit more optimistic than you. Perhaps is this a sign of Russia beginning to crumble a bit? But obviously, you're a bit more cynical in that, and that's your assessment's probably truer. I think
Not
actually,
not mine. Just reporting what other people have said.
that there's something, you know, Putin wants from this as well. But we can't deny this is good news. This is good news for the families, good news for the people. It was actually quite emotional watching some of the scenes. But it feels like a shift that I've not quite understood yet, if that makes sense. So let's see what happens there. And and Ukraine is right to be cynical. Why wouldn't they be? And it's like you said, it's all these people that are missing. You know, it's you either atone for it all or you don't. You know.
Yeah. Okay. Final story from Scotland. The Scottish Government announced a regional food fund today. Scottish food businesses, producers and groups are being encouraged to apply for grants of up to £5,000 to promote and champion produce from their local area. Scotland Food and Drink Partnership's Regional Food Fund launches its fifth round with £100,000 available from the Scottish Government to support regional food activity across Scotland. Since 2018, the Scottish Government has provided over £770,000 to the fund, which has supported 167 collaborative projects, varying from food and drink, tours and trails, festivals, new equipment, and regional marketing campaigns. Agriculture Minister Jim Fairley said, "Food and drink is one of our largest industry sectors and Scotland's largest employer, with an industry value of over £15 billion. The engagement of regional markets is vital in achieving our industry strategy and growth ambitions for the next 10 years. Scotland has a highly successful and influential food and drink sector, and this fund allows us to demonstrate that through the development of creative food and drink projects. These grants allow opportunities to increase the promotion of local produce, the chance for businesses to engage and educate local communities about what is available, and showcase some of our most exciting food and drink ventures. Undoubtedly, good news story, Siobhan. And I remember Jim Fairley speaking last year about um, being horrified seeing Marks and Spencer selling raspberries and strawberries brought up from England, when we have so many growing in your area. Well, not in the city, but out with the city. So anything which can boost local food businesses has got to be good in Scotland.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember being in New Zealand. Oh, geez, it must have been kind of late, the early 2000s actually. And even back then, they were having this kind of discussion about, how far do we go for food production, and this kind of notion of export, and we need to kind of keep things local and stuff. So we're far behind in that respect from other countries, but it is a good start, I think. I think that we have to kind of start thinking local. We need fresh, good good quality produce. One of the things that I'm involved in as a councillor is the local food and security projects, and obviously we have many food banks. We have, and lots of community cafes, lots of kind of good work actually that's been done. But one of the things that's getting built at the moment is partnership with local. You say Dundee doesn't have much, but we're well known for the berries and stuff like that. But partnering with local farmers and local produce to bring fresh produce in for people, for food banks and community cafes and so forth. So everybody has the right, and gets access to fresh fruit and vegetable for healthy living. So there's an element there that we can kind of tap into those resources as well. So there's a lot of work to be done. It's good that we're making it local. And you're right. I mean, why would you export? Bringing all the way from England. We have to be serious about things like the 20-minute neighbourhoods, and serious about kind of global warming as well. Why would we kind of like import up from England, so kind of 200 odd miles away, when we can get it on our doorstep? So there is that kind of element of encouraging local produce, but making it affordable. And I think that's maybe where these grants kind of can come into play. It has to be affordable for local people, because there's not much point in having this produce if people can't access it at an affordable level. So there's there's a lot of work to be done in that area, and a
Yeah,
lot of work to be done in order to kind of feed our population in a very, very healthy way. And we know what our health figures are, and we know it's partly due to bad diet as well. So hopefully we can shift that through these local initiatives.
yeah. I'll have to stop you there. And just to make clear, I wasn't suggesting that Dundee was all Pez. I was just meaning that
Oh,
you
we've
had
got
to go
a few of them as well.
you have to go to Invergary and beyond to get the berries, rather than within the city boundaries. Well, that's it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Right now, we urgently need to increase our donations if we are to be able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but our income is just over £2,000 a month, and we're now facing mounting debts. Please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you to Siobhan Tolland, our guest tonight, and thank you to you all for watching. Good night.